child vanishes during a game of hide and seek. A hiker's bones are found, but his body was never there. A man disappears in broad daylight, leaving behind only a boot caught in a fence. No footprints, no struggle, just gone. And the creepiest part? Witnesses saw something they weren't supposed to. What's really happening in the wild? Stay with me, because these stories will make you think twice before stepping into the woods alone. On Father's Day weekend in 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Martin embarked on a much-anticipated trip to the Great Smoky Mountains alongside his father, grandfather, and older brother. This annual camping tradition was something the Martin family eagerly looked forward to, and as they arrived at their familiar campsite, excitement filled the air. The first evening was peaceful. Crackling campfires, stories under the stars, and the soothing sounds of the wilderness. The following day, a fellow camper, who also had young children, struck up a conversation with Dennis's father. Upon realizing that their kids were of a similar age, he proposed that they all play together. Dennis's father agreed, and soon, a lively game of hide and seek was underway. Dennis, his brother, and the other children darted behind trees, giggling as they found new hiding spots. Dennis's father kept a close eye on his son throughout the game. At one point, he saw Dennis slip behind a particular tree, hiding just as the other kids scattered. But when the parents called out for the children to reveal themselves, Dennis never emerged. His father, still calm at first, walked toward the tree and called out, "Dennis, I know you're there." But as he rounded the tree, Dennis was gone. Panic set in almost instantly. His father sprinted into the forest, shouting his son's name at the top of his lungs. He covered nearly 2 miles along the Appalachian Trail, frantically searching, but Dennis was nowhere to be found. The rest of the family scoured the surrounding area, convinced he couldn't have gone far. After all, he had just been there seconds ago. As the hours passed, desperation grew. Park rangers were called in, followed by an unprecedented 1,500-person search operation, including the U.S. Army Green Berets. The effort spanned 60 square miles, with trained search teams meticulously combing through the dense forest. Despite their relentless efforts, not a single trace of Dennis. No clothing, no footprints, no scent trail was ever discovered. Investigators repeatedly questioned Dennis's father, struggling to comprehend how a child could simply vanish. If he had truly been watching Dennis the entire time, how could he have disappeared in an instant? Years later, while researching mysterious disappearances for his missing 411 project, investigator David Paulides uncovered an eerie detail linked to Dennis's case. On the day Dennis disappeared, the Key family, who had been camping in the same region, asked a park ranger where they might spot bears. The ranger directed them to a specific area known for wildlife sightings. As they made their way there, one of their children suddenly heard a scream in the distance. When they looked toward the nearby ridge, they saw something unusual. High up on the mountain, moving between sparse trees, was a dark, hairy figure. At first glance, it appeared bear-like, but its movements seemed distinctly human-like. It darted between trees with incredible agility and, most disturbingly, appeared to be carrying something slung over its shoulder, something that resembled a small child. The Key family later recounted this sighting to investigators, but their claims were largely dismissed. The idea that a bear man had been seen carrying a child was considered too outlandish to be included in official reports. The sighting was buried, only resurfacing decades later when it was linked to Dennis's disappearance in Missing 411. To this day, the case remains one of the most baffling vanishings in U.S. national park history. There was no body, no evidence, no explanations, only speculation, and a chilling account from a family who believed they saw something truly inexplicable. 17 years before Dennis Martin disappeared, a 2-year-old boy named Keith Parkins vanished under similarly bizarre circumstances. In the spring of 1952, Keith was playing outside his grandfather's ranch in Ritter, Oregon, alongside his siblings. As lunchtime approached, the children were called inside. But when the family gathered, Keith was nowhere to be found. A search party was immediately organized, with volunteers and authorities scouring the area. Hours passed, and no sign of Keith emerged. Then, for miles away from the ranch, searchers came across small footprints that appeared to belong to a toddler. The frantic search continued through the night, with no sign of the toddler. But in a shocking twist, Keith was discovered the next day 12 miles away from where he had disappeared. He was lying face down in the snow, barely dressed for the bitter cold. His jacket and hat had been carefully stacked beside him, as if someone had deliberately removed them. He had scratches across his face, but no serious injuries. Against all odds, he was alive. When asked what had happened, Keith, only 2 years old at the time, gave a strange response. He repeatedly stated that a cat had scratched him. That was the only explanation he could offer. But how could a toddler, alone in sub-zero temperatures, navigate 12 miles of dangerous wilderness in less than 20 hours? Years later, Les Stroud, a highly experienced survivalist and the host of Survivorman, attempted to recreate Keith's journey and failed. Even with his skills and endurance, he couldn't cover the same distance within the time frame, nor could he explain how a child could have survived the exposure. No one ever figured out what really happened to Keith that night. At the tail end of 1973, a 19-year-old amateur photographer, Charles McCullough, embarked on a journey to capture the natural beauty of America's national parks. In January 1974, he arrived in Oregon, eager to photograph Crater Lake. However, he lacked a suitable vehicle to navigate the rugged terrain. A friend with an all-terrain vehicle offered to drop him off near the lake, but before parting ways, Charles jokingly remarked, "If you don't hear from me in a few days, file a missing person report." Days passed, and when Charles failed to return, his friend alerted authorities. A massive search effort was launched, but no trace of Charles was found. His father, desperate for answers, stayed in Oregon for months, tirelessly scouring the area, but the wilderness gave up no clues. A year later, 2 hikers who had strayed off the main trail stumbled upon an abandoned backpack. Inside was an unusual Volkswagen key, one that Charles's friends immediately recognized. Investigators rushed to the area, 12 miles away from the original search zone, where they made a disturbing discovery. Near the backpack, they found Charles's remains, or what was left of them. His pants were draped over a log, unbuttoned, as if he had been sitting when he vanished. Inside the pants were his socks, and in the socks were his foot bones. His upper body was completely missing. 12 feet away, searchers discovered a portion of his skull, but no other remains. His jacket, boots, and camera equipment, items that should have been found near his body, were never recovered. Adding to the mystery, the region had been buried under 5 to 7 feet of snow at the time of his disappearance. Experts questioned how an inexperienced outdoorsman, ill-equipped for extreme conditions, could have traveled 12 miles through deep snow, only to end up in such an inexplicable state. Authorities ruled his death as natural causes, but Charles's family rejected this explanation. The missing remains, the eerie condition of his clothing, and the unexplained distance left them with more questions than answers. Bart Schleyer was no ordinary survivalist. A world-renowned hunter and expert in tracking Siberian tigers, he had spent months alone in the harshest landscapes on Earth. Dropped into any environment, he didn't just survive, he thrived. In September 2004, Bart planned an ambitious solo moose hunting expedition deep in the Yukon wilderness. He arranged for a float plane to drop him 175 miles north of civilization, instructing the pilot to return in 3 weeks. With his elite survival skills, no one doubted his ability to endure the brutal conditions. 3 weeks later, the pilot returned, but Bart was nowhere to be found. The pilot wasn't immediately alarmed. After all, Bart was a master of the wild. However, as he explored the campsite, something felt off. The camp was intact, no sign of struggle or destruction. Nearby, a dry bag with visible indentations suggested someone had been sitting on it against a tree. Next to it lay his bow and arrows, perfectly positioned as if he had been waiting to ambush prey. Yet Bart was gone. Days later, search teams combed the area and made a shocking discovery: a few teeth and small bone fragments. That was all that remained of a man who had once tracked Siberian tigers through the frozen wilderness of Russia. At first, authorities suspected a bear harm, but Bart's close friends strongly disagreed. He was an expert tracker, always aware of his surroundings. The idea that a predator had somehow ambushed him, a man so attuned to nature, seemed impossible. Even more unsettling was the lack of any large animal tracks or signs of a struggle. Nothing in the environment explained why Bart disappeared so suddenly, or why only small fragments of his remains were ever found. In the area where Bart Schleier's remains were found, something was disturbingly absent. Any sign of what experts call a death struggle. Normally, if someone is fighting for their life, the ground would be disturbed, objects scattered, and clear signs of a violent encounter would be present. But in Bart's case, there was none of that. Even more baffling was the state of his campsite. His gear remained untouched, and food was left out in the open, something that would have undoubtedly attracted bears or other scavengers. If a predator had attacked him, it would have raided his camp afterward, tearing apart supplies in search of food. But nothing had been disturbed. Despite this, authorities concluded that Bart had fallen victim to an animal harm. However, those who knew him, including seasoned survivalists, found this explanation laughably inadequate. Bart wasn't just a skilled outdoorsman. He was a master of wilderness survival, someone who had tracked Siberian tigers in the harshest conditions on Earth. The idea that a predator had sneaked up on him, completely unnoticed, was almost unbelievable. To this day, his disappearance defies logic. Was it an unknown predator? Something beyond our understanding? Or is there another explanation lurking in the wilderness? In 2002, Christopher Tompkins, a land surveyor, was working with a four-man crew in Harris County, Georgia. They followed a routine path, spaced about 50 feet apart, walking along a road bordered by a barbed wire fence. Christopher was the last in line. The worker in front of him would occasionally glance back, just to make sure he was still there. Each time he checked, Chris was right where he should be. Then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. There was no sound, no struggle, no warning. One moment he was there, and the next he had vanished. Confused, his co-workers stopped and turned back. They scanned the road, assuming he had stepped away for a moment. But he was nowhere to be seen. As they backtracked to where Chris had last been, they discovered a strange scene. On the ground, there was a scattered pile of loose change, as if someone had turned his pockets inside out. A few small tools from his work belt lay nearby. And strangest of all, one of his boots was caught in the barbed wire fence, as if it had been yanked off in a struggle. Yet there were no tracks leading away, no disturbance in the dirt, nothing to suggest where he had gone. Authorities launched a large-scale investigation, but no trace of Chris was ever found. Months later, his other boot was discovered 900 yards away, near a swamp, but that was it. No clothing, no remains, no answers. The strangest detail was the pile of change. Investigators noted that the way it was scattered suggested that Chris had been flipped upside down, as though something had suddenly lifted him, emptied his pockets, and disappeared with him before anyone could react. What could have snatched a full-grown man in broad daylight, without a single sound or struggle? The stories of Bart Schleier and Christopher Tompkins are only two among thousands of eerie disappearances cataloged in the Missing 411 series. Some argue that every case must have a rational explanation, even if we don't yet understand it. Perhaps freak accidents, undetected predators, or unexplored dangers in national parks are responsible. Others believe these vanishings are evidence of something more sinister, a force, a creature, or an intelligence hunting humans in the wild. Some theories suggest Bigfoot or an unknown cryptid, extraterrestrial abductions, government cover-ups of secret experiments. An interdimensional phenomenon. No matter where you stand, one thing is clear: people are vanishing under impossible circumstances. Could these be mere coincidences, or is something lurking in the forests and mountains of North America? Something beyond our comprehension. After hearing these stories, one thing is certain: the wilderness holds secrets we may never understand. Could these people have fallen victim to tragic accidents? Or is something far more sinister at play? The disappearances continue, and the answers remain just out of reach. But here's the real question: if this can happen to expert outdoorsmen, children, and professionals, what's stopping it from happening again? And more importantly, what's stopping it from happening to you? Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are more mysteries out there that demand to be uncovered. Until next time, stay safe.